Chair.
Okay, thanks, Senator Boyce. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Chair.
About, notwithstanding that I took longer, but we try and do these in segments of 15 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr Irvine. I've got a couple of questions that might follow on somewhat from where Senator O'Neill was discussing before in the instance of Australians travelling to the conflict in Syria. My questions relate to Australians who might find themselves in Yemen. Do you have a clear idea? I think you provided some estimates before, kind of rule of thumb estimates as to how many Australians have travelled to participate in one side or another of the conflict in Syria. Do you have similar, not that Yemen's in a state of open war, but do you have similar estimates for Australians there?
The numbers are very, very much smaller. We count them on the numbers of one or two hands at any one time.
Okay.
I'm just racking my brains to think of any priority cases that we have going in Syria, in the Yemen at the moment.
Can you just help me out? What's your definition of a priority case? That's somebody you're actively investigating?
Look, there are degrees of involvement and commitment. You can have people who are actively involved in terrorist organisations. There are people who are actively supporting terrorist organisations, but are not necessarily building bombs or shooting guns or whatever. There are people who are, can I say, talking the talk?
Is this kind of a degrees of separation question?
Yeah. Who are talking the language of violent jihad, often in quite boastful tones, but who may not necessarily take that next step, but who need to be watched very closely to ensure that they don't take that next step.
Okay.
So there's three elements of sort of rough distinction of prioritisation.
All right. And relative to Syria, a very low number of individuals that you're kind of having to keep tabs on?
Relative to Syria, it's quite a large number of individuals. Relative to Yemen, it's quite small.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. Into which of those three categories, are they formal categories within ASIO, or are you just giving us kind of rule of thumb?
No, that's a general description,
yeah, so I figured.
I think is...
Presumably you're familiar with the two Australian nationals, or one of them dual citizen with New Zealand and one of them an Australian, Christopher Harvard and Muslim bin John, who were killed in a US Predator drone strike in eastern Yemen on the 19th of November last year. Into which category would those two gentlemen have fallen?
I think I really have to say that that when you start referring to individuals, then I have to say that's definitely an operational matter.
Well, they're both dead. Does it really matter?
Yeah, but it does indicate levels of could indicate levels of operational detail, and I do not want to talk about individuals.
You did raise this yesterday, Senator, and I did try and explain to you that this is not something we talk about in this forum, and that position hasn't changed in the last 24 hours.
I was trying to get a sense, though. Mr Irvine was reasonably confidently able to address some questions on Australians in Syria. I just wonder why you closed him down when I changed the subject.
No, you asked some questions about Australians travelling to Syria. That's a matter about which both Mr Irvine and I have spoken publicly, and in fact about which I've taken questions in the Senate. So that's not an operational matter. It's just a relevant matter concerning national security, to which which is properly a matter of national attention, and it's perfectly appropriate for you to ask questions as long as they don't impinge upon operational matters. But all right. You go ahead and ask about Syria, Mr. Senator Ludlam.
No, I'm asking about Yemen. I thought.
Well, you've heard the Director General's response.
Well, he was about to respond, and I think you might have advised him not to.
No, that's not true.
Does it only become a matter of operational security when they're assassinated by US drones?
Senator Ludlam, that's an extremely foolish thing to say. I suggest you move on to another topic.
No, you don't get to close me down for being foolish, Senator Brandis.
No, I'm suggesting you move on to another topic. There'll be no more. You've sought to explore this matter. You've heard what the Director-General has had to say.
No, I haven't.
And well,
I haven't. He was about to reply and you spoke something into his ear and then he stopped talking.
Senator Ludlam, you have participated in this committee for long enough to know that the Director-General and the Minister at the table or anyone speaking on behalf of ASIO does not go into operational matters. You know that.
Okay.
You routinely choose to phrase questions as if you didn't know that, but you do know that.
I do. I am interested to know, though, whether, as you'd be aware, whether ASIO was involved in proving to your satisfaction, Attorney, that the two Australian citizens, and I think I do have a right to ask these questions given that they're Australian citizens, were killed in Yemen by a US drone strike, whether or not they were actually a security risk. You know, there's allegations in the press. Have they been substantiated?
The question that I would not answer in public is whether we assess them to be a security risk or not.
But I mean, that is your job, among other things, isn't it? It's what you do.
It's what we do.
Okay.
And in relation to the question you just asked, Senator Ludlam, of course, I wouldn't comment publicly on what advice is given to me or briefings are given to me by ASIO, and you wouldn't expect me to. I mean, not only because it relates to national security matters, but because it falls into the broader and well-accepted category that advice to ministers is not something that can be explored at estimates committees.
The United States asserts that these deaths are lawful and they have a published policy around militants, those suspected of conducting violent extremism in various parts of the world, and civilians. How does the Australian government assess whether these strikes are lawful? And my specific question of you, maybe I could put this in serial to Mr. Irvine and to you, Attorney, those ASIO operatives assessing whether these people are a security risk or not before they are targeted in drone strikes, and for ASD staff or other Australian staff at Pine Gap, how confident are you that they are not participating in war crimes?
Well, Senator Ludlam, almost everything you've, almost every assertion in that question.
Don't make any assertions, ask you a question.
Assertion in that question relates to matters about which, as you well know, neither ministers nor officials comment in this forum.
The UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings has argued that some of these targeted drone strikes may constitute war crimes under the Geneva Convention. So that's an assertion not of mine, but of Christoph Heinz from 2012. Are you familiar with that position?
I'm aware that there has been a very significant debate, both at an unsophisticated level or a relatively unsophisticated level in the press, and at a more sophisticated level among international law scholars about President Obama's administration's policy. Yes, I am.
Okay. And you're aware that, and this isn't press speculation, I understand the distinction that you draw by the UN Special Rapporteur. Presumably you would draw that into your second category of more nuanced or educated discussion of these issues.
Yes, I think that's a fair observation.
That's reasonable. So do you believe, therefore, that the deaths of those two Australian citizens might fall into that category of a war crime?
A, you're asking me to make a speculation, and B, it would be impossible in any event to address your question without trespassing into areas that, for reasons I have told you ad nauseam, I'm not at liberty to go.
I'm feeling a little nauseated as well. Are you confident that Australian officials involved either in intelligence transfers to the US through facilities like Pine Gap, or Mr. Irvine's staff who are doing these security assessments of individuals who are then assassinated, are immune from future accusations or allegations of assisting war crimes?
I'm very confident, without admitting any of the assertions or premises of your question, that ASIO and its officers operate in accordance with Australian law.
What about international law?
And in accordance with international law.
Okay, so last night you expressed almost complete indifference when I put these same questions to you.
Well, you might say that, but...
You did, but today you are confident, which is, I think, an advance.
You may say that, Senator Ludlam. You can characterise the exchanges in this committee as you choose. That's a matter for you.
Okay, thank you. On what basis do you express such confidence? Have you sought legal advice?
Senator Ludlam, once again, I'm not going to share with you or publicly discuss the advice that I receive.
How has that got any bearing at all on national security? Whether you've sought legal advice as to whether these strikes...
It's advice to government.
No, I'm not asking for the advice. I know that's completely inconceivable that would be shared with the Parliament. I'm just wanting to know whether such advice has been sought.
Senator Ludlam, I'm not going to share with you advice that I receive. I receive advice, including legal advice.
You have?
I receive advice, including legal advice, in relation to ASIO's operations quite often.
Have you sought advice in specific relation to the US drone strike
I'm not going to go beyond that statement.
So the sophisticated debate that you acknowledge exists elsewhere, you refuse to participate in here in Australia?
Well, I'm actually not a participant in that debate.
Well, you are. You're the Chief Law Officer of the country.
I'm not a participant in a debate, Senator Ludlam. I'm not a commentator. I'm not an investigator.
Not asking for commentary.
I'm not an international law scholar. I'm a cabinet minister, and ASIO is an agency for which I have ministerial responsibility. They report to me. It is part of my job to be satisfied that they discharge their obligations under their Act, and I am.
In response to some questions on notice that I put to you, you informed us that all activities at Pine Gap are conducted in compliance with Australian law, and I thank you for that response. Are activities at Pine Gap also conducted in compliance with international human rights and humanitarian law?
Well, Senator Ludlam, I'm confident that all activities are conducted in accordance with all relevant laws. And beyond that, with your previous question, I'm not prepared to go.
And on what basis do you assert that activities are in compliance?
I'm not asserting. I'm telling you that I'm confident of a matter because that is a conclusion I have reached.
Sounds like
on the basis of the advice that I'm given.
I might put a couple of other questions to defence when we get to them. Thanks very much for your fulsome and detailed assistance in this matter.
Well, I know you're trying to be sarcastic, Senator Ludlam, but you know that most of the questions you asked me were questions that I am not at liberty to answer with any more particularity than I've done.
Thank you. I took